When I was 8 years old, I started saving up photos of puppies and human babies to be framed for my future office. I hadn't decided if I was going to be a doggy doctor or a baby doctor, but I knew it was going to be one of the two. I was convinced that I would grow up to have a job that was all about righting wrongs, giving hope back to people, and I knew that I was going to be the type of person who could leave rooms and leave people better than I had found them. In other words, I was what most children are, an idealist. Well, I didn't quite grow up to have that office with the framed pictures next to my framed medical degrees. In fact, I'm building a career in an industry that is slightly less known for selflessness and the greater good. I work in advertising. My career is shaped, and I believe uniquely so, by a very personal tension that I face every day. How do I reconcile my still very present pursuit for trying to make the world a better place in an industry that is obsessed with pursuing profit? In facing this challenge every day, I've learned valuable lessons on not only how to keep that inner idealist alive, but also how to harness it to actually become a force, a driving force, a powerful force that guides everything that I do, that guides every decision that I make on a daily basis. Just like my inner idealism shapes my career in advertising also strengthens my inner idealist. This belief is often put to the test as the nature of advertising, the nature of the industry that I work in, is questioned in its credibility of creating impact. If I truly wanted to change the world for the better, shouldn't I be working in a different sector, in a different industry that isn't all about how much stuff I can sell? Well, this brings me to the first of 3 myths that I'm here to break for you today. And throughout this, I would also like to share how I try to keep my inner idealist alive while harnessing it to find fulfillment in the everyday. If you too have an inner idealist, I hope you find these tactics useful. And know that you don't ever have to compromise your idealism for realities of life or career. So, myth number 1. Idealists should only pursue careers in certain sectors, otherwise they are sellouts. Well, contrary to what feels natural, it's not all about picking sides. It's about integrating idealistic values into pragmatic choices, especially when it comes to forging your career path. Idealists can find fulfillment in nonprofits just as much as they can thrive in a Fortune 500 company. They're not defined by income, level of personal sacrifice, or the sector they work in. They're defined by the small actions they take every single day, which sets them apart from neutral bystanders. It can be something like standing up for a colleague who's being bullied. It can be standing up to a bigoted client. It can even be standing up to a corporation and holding them responsible for how they're stereotyping people of color. If you work in advertising like me, it can also become a superpower, used to fight for inclusive representation in commercials or socially responsible activations and initiatives that you have the influence to convince multi-million-dollar companies to invest in. No matter what career path you choose, ask yourself, how do I integrate and inject my personal values into my everyday interactions? Could be with colleagues, with peers, with clients, with managers, regardless of whether or not impact or reward is guaranteed. Because as long as you stay true to your own beliefs, no matter how big or small, or even if there is an impact, you will never be a sellout. Okay, myth number 2. Idealists are naive and don't understand how the real world works. I think idealists can be easier targets for mockery and often dismissive comments because, simply put, hope is not very cool. It takes a lot of vulnerability to show hope, and I would actually argue that vulnerability is probably the coolest thing out there because it takes so much courage to wear your heart on your sleeve, open and ready for anybody to challenge and to combat. It takes bravery to stand up for what you think is right and what you think is good, even when nobody else is on your side. Actually, especially when nobody else is on your side. It's easy to say that idealism is the same as being naive and saying things like, the world doesn't really work that way, you're the only one that truly believes that, you need to be more realistic, etc., etc. But don't ever let those words of judgment get you down from actualizing your ideals. If it doesn't get through to somebody today, try again tomorrow somewhere else, and you never know what might stick. Myth number 3. Idealists are not that fun to be around. So, an uncomfortable truth that I've come to learn is that not everybody is quite as triggered by the same things that you might be. And it can be very disheartening. And often you might be perceived as awkward company because of how open you are to sharing your own opinions. A simple brunch can turn into an eye-rolling debate over whether, in the grand scheme of things, how important is it that one person doesn't use one single straw. Or a dinner with colleagues can become quite a emotionally distressing experience when you realize that you're the only person who is angry about the misogynistic joke made in this fun menu. I mean, if these people are your peers, your friends, shouldn't you be caring about the same things? Why aren't they as angry as you are? Why are you the only one that's bothered by this? And then that familiar silence can ensue and somebody tries to change the subject to avoid the night being ruined by you. What I've learned is that being a good idealist, being an effective idealist, is not just about standing up and voicing out what you believe in. Being a good idealist is, more than anything, being an engaging storyteller, an empathetic listener, and an effective salesperson. It means actively and iteratively changing and adapting your communication style, your listening style, so your audience feels at ease and open to you, even if they're not exactly open to the topics that you were talking about. So I know that while catering a truth to fit other people's comfort might seem counterintuitive, it's actually much more damaging if you inadvertently lead your audience into associating you and your causes with awkward interactions that they probably will avoid in the future. So ask yourself this before you go into any interaction. How do I package something that I believe in a way that my audience can see benefit for them? So here's an example, a recent example from work. We had a client that was selling products to young audiences in certain markets that we discovered had quite overt societal issues that led to a lack of inclusive representation in mass media, especially in commercials and pop culture. So it was an opportunity to atone for that and to address that and very intentionally try to change that. It was quite a difficult journey because the senior client, the decision maker, was from a more conservative generation that didn't quite see the benefit of inclusive representation the same way that our generation might feel so strongly about. So to me, the motivation was so simple, so straightforward. If we're a brand that is about empowering and talking to a young target audience, an audience that includes groups of people that are often ignored, downright even dismissed when it comes to representation, also, we're about to disrupt them on their screens while they're doing something that they chose to do, and boom, our ad appears. We surely should be saying something that's worthwhile, right? Well, this is not what I told the client. Instead, what I did was I did research and packaged a narrative around why we should have inclusive representation, because people of that consumer group would spend more money with brands that could appreciate and acknowledge diverse lifestyles. So this very generic data point, research point, became a weapon in bringing our senior client on board and seeing how inclusive representation actually benefited their bottom line. So the campaign launched. It went out to now hundreds of millions of people in those markets, and it actually became a social space, a safe space on social for people to talk about this topic and to openly share their experiences. And this wasn't the reward or the intention of approaching the campaign the way that we did, but it made us feel really good, and it made me feel really proud. So a common expectation of hanging out with idealists is you'll likely be walking into a trigger fest. But I believe with the right communication tools in place, you can position interactions with idealists as something that is full of fulfilling interactions, moments of connection, and highly valuable conversations that challenge other people to explore their own vulnerability. So I'll leave you with this. Being an honest idealist goes hand in hand, as I mentioned earlier, with a healthy dose of realism. It's not about picking a side. So I know my work in advertising won't change the world, probably won't even make a dent. But with that said, something as transient as the advertisement that I mentioned earlier, knowing that somewhere, somehow, somebody sparked, however fleeting, a topic, a conversation about feeling heard and feeling seen, that just makes it all worth it. So what this has taught me is that I do have the power to put a little bit of what I believe to be true out into the world. And I'm lucky because the industry that I work in gives me access to media and resources where I can reach many people. And I have a responsibility to do that privilege justice by making sure that everything that we say through the brands that we represent is intentional, is as meaningful and as purposeful and inherently good and true as it could possibly be. And if I tirelessly hold myself to that, perhaps somewhere I can plant a seed of change. Could be a seed of doubt, could be a seed of curiosity, could be a seed of compassion. If I can do that, then I've done my job well. Then I have made that 8-year-old girl with all of those baby pictures and puppy pictures and a head full of dreams happy and proud. So I encourage all of you to have a think. Are you an idealist? Do you have an inner idealist? Where do you draw your values, your personal value propositions from? Do you believe there's even a place for idealists in today's world? Thank you.